Hi again, everyone. It's Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and welcome to ACC Breakdown. We bring in the best bloggers in the conference to talk football every Wednesday night. This week we've got Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland, Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC, and also we've got Jeff Greenberg on board to talk up some North Carolina football. So we were going to talk Clemson recruiting first and get a recap on National Signing Day, but just a couple days ago, Duke quarterback Thomas Sirk ruptured his Achilles during team conditioning drills. Of course, Sirk led Duke to a bowl victory for the first time in 64 years, Mike. So he's kind of questionable in regards to his readiness for August and beyond even.
Yeah, so typical Achilles injury from everything that I read says that it's more likely that he'd be ready by the middle of October, potentially early November. And if that's the case, I think Duke might be in a position where they'll maybe want to redshirt Thomas Sirk, have him take a medical redshirt, give him an extra year of eligibility, and just kind of sit him out. Because by that point in time, I mean, depending on what their record is, of course, I think that they'd be better served to have Sirk an extra year and have him just play in 2017. I think that might be a better option depending on how he heals. Those Achilles injuries are very tricky. There's no doubt that Duke would be losing a guy who ran their offense to a T. He was a good game manager this year. I know a lot of quarterbacks hate that term, but that's exactly what he was. 2,600 yards passing this past season, completed 60% of his passes, 16 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions, so the ratio is okay. He also ran the ball a good bit for them as well. His most notable rushing performance was actually in the Pinstripe Bowl, where he ran for 155 yards in their bowl victory against Indiana, and he had 2 touchdowns rushing in that game and a touchdown passing as well. His backup quarterback is Parker Boehm. He was a sophomore this past year. He was more of a wildcat quarterback, so I guess if there was a quarterback they'd rather have running, it wasn't Sirk, it was Parker Boehm, even though Sirk ended up running a good bit this past year. Boehm came in a lot of situations as a third down runner, a wildcat quarterback, kind of a power guy, a pretty big frame. He's 6'2", 220, so he's got good size for a quarterback. He's going to be a junior next season. Limited action passing the football, 43 of 78 for 579 yards this year and 2 touchdown passes, so he's limited in that regard. As far as game experience, most of his experience has come in rushing the football. And we look at Duke, and Duke signed 5 4-star prospects to this year's recruiting class. It was their best recruiting class in school history, but it was a recruiting class that did not include a quarterback. So it's pretty ironic that now they're losing a starting quarterback. Maybe they could use a guy at that position. All of a sudden, they don't have one in the pipeline, at least coming right out of high school, but they do have Parker Boehm, and that's who they're going to turn to should Thomas Sirk not be able to go. And it looks like Sirk is at least going to miss the first 4 or 5 games of next season at the very least.
Yeah, in a league loaded with quarterback talent in 2015 with the likes of Deshaun Watson and on the list, Thomas Sirk not wowing anyone with physical skills, but very effective both running and throwing the football, and if I'm not mistaken, led Duke in rushing last season, and you know the big performance in the Pinstripe Bowl to cap off a pretty stellar season for the Blue Devils. So that's his situation. We'll see how David Cutcliffe handles it starting in August camp. Let's move on to some Clemson football talk. Ryan, we did our best on National Signing Day Eve and the night of National Signing Day, I should say, in recapping the Clemson recruiting class. That was another stellar one. But now we bring you in, bring in the big guns to give us the lowdown. So, Ryan, your thoughts about Clemson's recruiting class, and despite the existing personnel and talent on the roster, those guys that could possibly make an impact right away?
Yeah, I think you can make a really good argument this is the best class that Clemson has ever brought in. And what you look at there is the blue chip percentage. It's the percentage of the recruits that are 4 or 5 stars. National champions over the last decade or so have been more than half blue chippers, and we finally cracked that threshold with this recruiting class. So this is a great one. Maybe not as flashy, maybe not as many guys who are going to make an immediate impact. That's a good thing. That's a good commentary on where the rest of the roster is. Now, the defense did lose a fair amount. A lot of juniors left early. So there's a handful of guys, I'll just name 4, that could make a pretty quick impact for the defense. At linebacker, you have Trey Lamar and Rayshawn Smith, both 4 stars. Trey Lamar out of Roswell, suburban Atlanta, Georgia. He may get some snaps at middle linebacker. B.J. Goodson, Clemson's middle linebacker, had a ton of tackles last year. He's gone now. He's a senior. So I don't know that Trey Lamar will start, but my hypothesis is that weak side linebacker Ben Boulware will shift over. He's played some middle linebacker, so that would make Trey Lamar, that would put him in the 2 deep, at worst the 3, but he should definitely see snaps. Rayshawn Smith is another linebacker. He'll probably take snaps at will regardless of if Boulware moves or not, likely in the 2 deep. So I think you'll see a lot of a fair amount of playing time for both of those guys pretty quickly, and at some point when they're both starters, that's going to be a phenomenal linebacking core. And then I think on the defensive line, you have 2 other guys. You have 5-star Dexter Lawrence, number 2 recruit in the entire nation. He's going to come in, even though Clemson has a ton of depth at defensive tackle. He's a big guy, weighs about 327 pounds. He's going to make an impact. He's going to be a run stuffer, and he's quick enough to put some pressure on the quarterback as well. So you've got Christian Wilkins, you've got Carlos Watkins, you've got Scott Pagano, but he's too good to not get playing time. He's just, he's a 5-star. He's just that good. And then the other name to look out for on defense is Xavier Kelly. He plays in basketball in high school, and he's really athletic. Probably needs to put on some weight if he's really going to get playing time. But Clemson lost both defensive ends. Both are likely to be first-round picks. So just by roster maturation and the way it shakes out, he'll almost certainly be in the 2 deep, and we really need him.
Hey, Ryan, we touched on this last week in trying to run down the Clemson class and then really put it into context what it really means. So I'll ask you, because it's easy right now because of the recent success to put Clemson in a certain strata with the rest of the elite in college football, but it wasn't that long ago that this was a 7-win, 8-win program each and every year. So it's got to be kind of amazing what Dabo Swinney has been able to do in the time that you've been following this program, because you remember what it was before, which was not anything close to awful, but it wasn't. It was pretty likely that Clemson would pull in a top 25 recruiting class, but these recruiting classes are elite.
A big difference in these recruiting classes, Clemson's gotten flashy wide receivers and good running backs for a while. Tommy Bowden was able to do that. Brought in C.J. Spiller. Bowden was still the coach. Dabo recruited him. James Davis, who briefly played for the Cleveland Browns. We've had plenty of good skill position talent, but now we're bringing in great offensive and defensive linemen. And you saw us against Alabama, despite losing. We held our own in the trenches for the most part, and that's a huge difference. Mental and physical toughness, that's been the mark that Dabo wanted to make. He said it early on. It's been a long process, but these coaches, I don't recall the stat, but there's so many coaches who won their national championship in the first 2 years of being at the program. For Dabo, it's been a long building process. I shouldn't say long. A building process that they've just been growing the program, becoming better over time. And so, it's really rewarding to see them, do it the right way, continually get better, and hopefully that'll continue this year.
Yeah, and this year starts with another SEC power in Auburn, one of those ACC-SEC matchups at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. So Auburn's been down, but still provides a pretty stiff challenge for the Tigers coming out of the gate. Ryan, we know you got a big Major League Baseball fantasy draft. So,
yes, coming up. Let me
without giving anything away, can you give us an idea of who those guys are that you're pretty high on here?
It's actually a keeper league, so we've got some real bottom of the barrel, not great talent. One note on Auburn, I recall maybe a little bit over a year ago now when that game was announced, talking to one of my Auburn friends, and they had just gotten Muschamp as their defensive coordinator, and I was just lamenting, like, man, we are going to get crushed. That is going to be a ridiculous Auburn team. Now you're going to have Muschamp in year 2. And just kind of annoyed with that schedule. And then now Auburn had tried to back out of it. Muschamp's not even there. We're already, I think, a 7-point favorite. It's on the road. It's in Auburn, but we're still 7-point favorites. It's just crazy how much things change so quickly sometimes.
My bad. I just kind of assumed that was that SEC ACC early season Week 1 matchup, but that's apparently saved for somebody else. So yeah. A couple of years ago, when you see Auburn at the start of the schedule and South Carolina at the end, you're looking at, wow, this is going to be pretty serious. But those two programs in a different place than they were just a few years ago. So, yeah. Ryan, at whatever point you need to jump off, we appreciate you jumping on board with us here.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, let's talk some North Carolina football. So, big season for the Tar Heels, ACC championship game. I was kind of disappointed. I'm sure you were much more disappointed in the effort against Baylor in the Russell Athletic Bowl, and I think we discussed it at the time. Your thoughts about the recruiting class, and maybe we can start with those guys that really grab the headlines that Tar Heel fans are anxious to see on the field.
Yeah, Coach Fedora came away with a class he's very happy with, as all coaches will say, but this one really made him happy in terms of the depth and the balance that it provides for them. They've got a lot of starters coming back again next year, but what they really needed to do is build depth, and they did that with this class. It's their first full class since he's been at UNC due to scholarship reductions and things like that, and they brought in 26 total guys, 7 of which enrolled early. They were all three stars and above, which is actually the most 3 stars and or above UNC class since '09, and the previous one being in '97 back in the Mac Brown years. A big important part of that was grabbing some in-state guys again. North Carolina gets poached a lot by the SEC schools, by Clemson, by some big names that come in. So he was able to get what he would call six particular North Carolina kids that he considers the best at their particular positions. So that was a good improvement. Definitely a product of winning. As he mentioned in his press conference signing day, winning helps a lot on the recruiting trail, and they saw that as they closed this class up, and they've already seen it in how 2017 has gotten off to an even better start. Already, even that class, if it just finished as is, would have more 4 stars than this current class, but off to a good start. Some of the guys that grabbed the headlines would be one guy that actually Virginia Tech kind of almost came in at the end and pulled off, and that was Timon Fox, the defensive end out of Georgia. Good talent, probably one of the more highly rated guys in terms of potential in this class. He officially visited Blacksburg that last weekend before signing day and stayed with the Tar Heels. So that was, I know, a huge relief for the coaching staff. That was one of those guys they were hoping stuck with it. Same with another linebacker out of Jacksonville. In terms of the guys, like I mentioned, with scout rankings that are the 4-star guys, you've got tight end out of North Carolina, Garrett Walston. The staff was big on him. They beat out Georgia and NC State to get him. They had him working on him, as they did all of these commits. About 18 to 24 months is what Fedora said was their average relationship with with this class. Another 4-star guy would be offensive lineman J.J. McCargo. He's the most polished lineman of the class, and they finally have built some depth on the offensive line, but it's nice to get more and get quality depth in there. And in terms of playmakers, because when you think of Fedora's offense, you're going to want to see who's that next playmaker. One guy to keep an eye on from Tennessee is Rontavious Groves. He's a speedster, just one of those guys when he touches the ball, he makes something happen. Similar to a guy that I'll comment on a little later, actually from the Clemson class that's from my hometown here, that's just the real deal. But then also out of Durham, North Carolina, Jordan Brown led his team to the state championship game. He played wide receiver. He played running back. By the state championship game due to injury, he was playing quarterback. So sort of your dynamic, I guess they would call it A-back in the spread offense. So another guy that they're interested in. In terms of guys that could step in right away, some of those early enrollees are guys that could fit that bill. One being a junior college transfer linebacker Copeland. They're losing Jeff Schottmer, the middle linebacker. This is a guy that could probably step right in and help fill the depth there behind Andre Smith. Another couple guys, 2 big safeties. One, Miles Woolfolk, and then also Miles Dorn, who's a legacy player. His dad, Torn Dorn, played at UNC as well and had some time in the NFL. 2 big, rangy safeties that really are going to add some good depth to the defensive backfield. That was the emphasis of this class, was DBs. They brought in 6 of them out of the 26. And then, 2 guys you got to keep an eye on because it's a Larry Fedora-type offense is the quarterbacks they brought in. One, Chad Surratt, is from North Carolina, broke a lot of records, just got named last week as the Parade National Player of the Year, which is nothing to sneeze at. He's a two-sport athlete too, so he's got a lot of run-pass capabilities. And then another guy to keep an eye on is Logan Bird out of Georgia. This guy is kind of in that Tim Tebow mold in terms of size and running ability, but a better passer. And Fedora should know something a little bit about that because he's the one that recruited Tebow to Florida. So it'd be interesting to watch these two guys. They've got a lot of depth to compete with. So, but I think as we've learned, unfortunately, like when North Carolina played Baylor, you need extra quarterbacks, and sometimes those extra quarterbacks can throw a wrinkle on an offense that brings you to victory in a bowl game. So these guys have the ability to be a factor, not this year, probably not next year, but in the years after. But overall, again, the class, top 25 class, which is big for North Carolina, coming out of having scholarship reductions. Third in the ACC is just about where you want to be, and this is according to scout rankings because they're not going to compete yet with Florida State and Clemson on the recruiting trail. It's just not going to happen because, as you guys mentioned earlier, and I totally agree with, those two teams are in that upper echelon elite recruiting status right now. I think Ryan mentioned it. When you've got 50% or more of your class blue chippers, there's only a rarefied air a couple of teams that have that. So for UNC to maybe pull off the third best class, according to scout rankings, that's a big deal in Chapel Hill. I know I was able to touch base with Fedora during their junior day 2 weeks before signing day, and you could just tell he was excited about who they were going to get, and he's excited about how the 2017 class has started out already. Most of what you usually see in a season of wins like 2015 affects not the 16 class but the next one, and I think they're seeing that now.
So, Jeff, you were looking for what position to be bulked up against Baylor? You would have liked to seen another what? What position was that?
For Baylor, it would have been nice to have a few more defensive linemen and linebackers.
Okay.
What Baylor showed is that you have to have more than one quarterback. I mean, Baylor was on their third-string quarterback and basically put in a retooled offense that they had only run for 5 minutes before that, and that was good enough to win. So.
Okay, I thought I heard something else, and I was thinking you needed about 8 more defensive tackles in that game.
Yes.
65 yards rushing. Wow, that was crazy.
And you know what? The good news is with this class, there were 5 defensive linemen brought in, 4 linebackers brought in. Going to get some guys coming back in off injury. So the issues up front were a big emphasis, as well as in the defensive backfield.
Hey, Jeff, before we move it back to Mike, your assessment of the ACC overall, I'm guessing that you're looking at, you said Scout.com's rating North Carolina ahead of Miami. I know that Miami had a decent class, mostly rated in the top 20 across the board, with just about half the class was 4 stars out of all the commits. Just your assessment of the entire ACC, anything else stand out to you?
Well, I think, again, you kind of have Clemson, you have Florida State, and then I think you could probably interchange the Miami class, the UNC class, the Duke class. This will be one of the rare years where those 3 teams maybe separated themselves from Virginia Tech. I have no doubt that Virginia Tech will bounce right back up next season with Fuente being there and installed and have it. He's already gotten a big 4-star pickup even this last week. So I think those teams will always be battling it out for that 3rd, 4th, 5th spot in the ACC. I think they all hired really good coaches, so it's going to make that very interesting on the recruiting trail moving forward. The one guy I was mentioning that Clemson picked up that Ryan didn't mention is a receiver to keep an eye on. His name's Cornell Powell out of Greenville, North Carolina. He's one of these kids where his team made it to the state championship game. They would not have made it to the state championship game without him. When they had the Shrine Bowl as well, North Carolina versus South Carolina, he was a stud. I got to be on the field for one of his games, and he's one of those guys in high school where when he gets the ball, it takes like 8 guys to track him down because he's that much better of an athlete. So that's someone for Clemson. The rich get richer in the receiving core, and they got one out of Cornell. And that was, based on what Mike was talking about with Sirk at Duke, the one positive out of it, I guess, is at least Coach Cutcliffe has the spring practice and the August practice to try to figure out what that remedy is going to be. This would have been much more devastating in context if it happened in fall camp.
Hey, Mike, at the time, just a week ago, obviously the names were still not dry on the dotted lines, and we were really focused on recruiting classes, rankings, and particular players flipping and signing with particular teams. But now that you've had a week to let it digest, your thoughts about the ACC overall and anything else that really stands out to you?
Yeah, so as far as what we talked about last week, as National Signing Day was kind of concluding, winding down, it was kind of the way that Clemson and Florida State were kind of able to separate themselves from the rest of the ACC. I think what Jeff's talking about with North Carolina, he's absolutely right. I think the one thing about the Tar Heels that impressed me is the way they were able to recruit on the defensive side of the football. As we know, their defense had struggled the last couple seasons. They really struggled 2 years ago, one of the worst defenses in all of college football. They made a good positive step forward this year, although it didn't necessarily show in the bowl game. Overall, it was a step in the right direction, and the way they've recruited on that side of the football, most notably with Tamon Fox, is what really stood out to me with North Carolina's recruiting class. And I think Jeff's right. You know, North Carolina, Miami, Duke, those three schools can kind of be interchanged. I was really impressed with what Pittsburgh has done as well, bringing in the talent they brought in on defense, as well as mixing in some good players to supplement them on offense. The hope is that James Conner will be back at running back, coming off his cancer treatment. If he's back, along with Quadri Allison, hopefully they get some more consistent play out of Nate Peterman. A very good, consistent run game, a 1-2 punch that they could possibly have with Connor and Allison, I think would be huge for them, especially on the offensive side of the ball next year. They already have that defense in place. I was really impressed with them. NC State's a team I continue to say you have to watch out for them. I really like their recruiting class. They got sheer numbers of 3-star recruits. I believe it's 27 or 28 recruits total in this year's class. They're not necessarily high-end recruits outside of Thad Moss, but they do have a lot of guys who I think are going to be able to contribute and make a positive impact, and Dave Doran's club is definitely taking a step in the right direction there at NC State. It'll be interesting to see how Jalen McClendon takes over the quarterback position, if he is in fact going to be the guy, highly touted out of high school, played, was a backup this past year, Jacoby Brissett. He'll come in this year, and he should be the starter, and I'm really interested to see how he performs with the offensive line issues they've had off and on, see if they can shore those up and take a step forward on offense and on the defensive side of football as well. So, we're still watching out for Demetrius Robertson at Duke, we're watching for him at Georgia Tech. Notre Dame, perhaps, he has an outside shot of going there. We're still waiting on his SAT scores to see if he's going to perhaps go to Stanford. Joey Weaver talked about that last week. So while it's not completely settled yet, we're almost to the point now where we can take a step, and we have a pretty good take a step back, and we have a pretty good look at what these recruiting classes are. And really, we're taking a watchful eye now to the 2017 recruiting class. I know that spring football is really right around the corner here in the next month and a half or so, but a lot of these schools are holding junior days, like Jeff Greenberg talked about there just a moment ago. They got a lot of schools. UNC held theirs right before National Signing Day. Virginia Tech just held theirs right after. A bunch of different schools are doing them in between those times. So it's kind of interesting to see if there are any verbal commits. We know that Virginia Tech was able to land 4-star defensive end Ty Garbutt out of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Big get for them, especially losing a guy like Daddy Nicholas this season, and then they're going to lose Kenny Canham because he's going to be a senior this coming season. So having a 4-star defensive end in the pipeline will definitely help them in 2017 and beyond. So he was a very good pickup for them early in their recruiting process for the 2017 class. So we're starting to see schools kind of grab some recruits here for next year's class, and this is a kind of a never-ending cycle with recruiting. So we'll see where the rest of the ACC schools go from here, but I think it's clearly Florida State and Clemson, and then a clear step above everybody else as far as recruiting goes in the ACC.
Jeff Greenberg, also have Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC on the line. Guys, so Mike just mentioned it right there, 6 weeks away roughly from spring football practice. Obviously, we'll dive into it at that point, and then other than that, we've got a pretty good gap between now and the beginning of August camp to dive into all sorts of things. So we'll do some positional rankings, coaches' rankings. I also just had the thought as Mike was talking, maybe we pin the ACC each week against another Power 5 conference, and I'll list the ACC teams 1 through 14 as they were seeded against the other conference, and then we'll just get your opinions on who would win that matchup. And we'll just, it's very non-technical, But just who would win that matchup against the Big Ten and the SEC, Big 12 and the Pac-12?
Let's do it. Sounds good.
Exercise.
By the way, that opening game you were looking for, it's September 3rd, UNC and Georgia playing in the Georgia Dome.
That's it. North Carolina, Georgia. That's a good-looking football game. Can't wait for that.
It got a lot more interesting when they hired Kirby Smart than it did halfway through the season when Georgia was nosediving.
That's for damn sure.
Yeah, that'll be a nice one. All right, good stuff, guys. I appreciate you coming on. We'll catch you soon.
All right, thanks, Mark.